Hi folks, Jennnifer Nelson here, founder of Scout Real Estate. Glad you're listening in. I created Pocket Hours podcast to elevate our game and help us all learn from the best. I have interviewed some of the top producers in our industry about best practices, among many other things. We also tackle industry issues and changes with great conversation from many of our leaders. And the best part is you get clock hours just for listening in. After you have listened to 3 episodes, just email info@scoutrealestate.com to answer a few easy questions for the interview, and you will receive your certificate. Meanwhile, enjoy listening and learning, and go out there and be the agent you would hire. Today is kind of a fun day for me. I have to be honest, I'm a little nervous about it because it has been requested by some folks that I be interviewed on my own podcast. And I want to let you know, from one control freak to another, if you're out there, that was something that I said no to for a while. And then upon more people bugging me about it, decided to go ahead and do it. So today, Kristine Milkovich has been so gracious in offering to be the person to interview me. Actually, she didn't offer. I recruited her also by demand because folks were saying, if you're going to get interviewed, please have her do it. She's such a wordsmith and so well-spoken. And so can't wait for you to hear our interview. We talk a lot today about the buyer-broker agreement and the changes in our industry and your compensation as a buyer-broker. So hopefully you'll enjoy this interview. And we have something different today, pretty exciting. A couple of folks have come forward and asked if I could be interviewed on my own podcast, which is kind of fun and a little bit scary to give up the control. So I entrusted it to someone who has also requested to do the interview. So today, this morning, we have Kristine Milkovich, who's joining us. So happy you're here. Thank you for doing this.
This is going to be a blast. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be invited. Let's see how it all works.
Exactly. So I'm going to let her take the lead, and we'll see how this all rolls out.
So first of all, Jennnifer, thank you for having me on and kind of flipping the switch here. No pressure, putting me in your very skilled and tenured moderator seat, but I will do my best. So this is going to be fun. So couple things. When I had the opportunity to be on your podcast a couple months ago last year, I started thinking, okay, I want to certainly try to model what you've been doing with your guests and all the great setup. But I know there's some really specific, interesting 2024 things we're going to talk about as it relates to the market. But before we get to all that, like who's Jennnifer? You know, I know who you are, and the other folks that you've put in the hot seat know who you are and what you're about and your tenure. But give us a little 1, 2, 3 of where you've been, where you are today, and where you think you want to go.
Oh, I love it. Okay. Well, okay, let me start here to say, I think the road to real estate is so fascinating, right? I mean, you can line up 50 realtors and ask where they came from, and they would all have a different story. So there isn't somebody who wakes up and goes, you know what I want to be as a realtor when they're 8 years old. They just don't. It just doesn't happen. I went to undergrad in Georgia and grad school in Pennsylvania, got my degree in Master's of Counseling, came out to Seattle to work at Seattle Pacific University in the dormitories and in training leaders. And went from there to buy my first house and thought, this is interesting. Sort of combining my love of education and some of the sales and negotiation pieces that I really love. So bought my first house and jumped ship after I was a dean of students for UPrep high school for a couple of years. And then, gosh, I was just adding up the years, 2002. So what is that? 22 years now ago. I mean, that makes me old, but yeah, a little bit ago. Yeah. Started into real estate. So it's been a little bit. And I feel like anybody that's sort of seen themselves through the Great Recession and kind of come on the other side, that we should all just have a badge that, says I made it through or something. Those were dark days.
For sure. Just having that grit and ability and skill, and back to your formal education, the communication to be able to get through those tough times. It's one thing to be able to use them to take care of people and in your business today, but hats off to you and the brokers that got through the 08-09 crisis for sure. Now, coming full circle, now that we know a little bit more about where Jennnifer's been, talk to us a little bit about your entrepreneur side, certainly in your career, but as of late, and Scout that you've built out, being the owner, the principal broker, the managing broker. Tell us a little bit about your brand and your mission and what you guys are up to over there in West Seattle.
I was with Windermere at my beginning and I loved it. And I became assistant manager fairly quickly and sort of played that role and continued to sell for quite a long time. And then was thinking about opening up my own Windermere office and sort of had a lot of different research about what I was going to do and how I was going to do it. And then just decided I really wanted to go in a different direction and started with two other friend and partner at the time, Metropolis, where I was one of the three owners of that company for 8 years. And then once again, kind of pivoted and said, okay, I think I actually have a different vision and started Scout 2 years ago. This March 1st, in fact, is that today? I don't know.
Wow,
Really soon.
Congratulations. It's coming up, your anniversary.
Thank you. Yes. Tomorrow, no, in a month, I guess it'll be 2 years. And it's been super fun to watch that grow and have the right people come at the right time. And we are going to will maintain to be a small brokerage, probably getting up to 12, maybe 15. And then that's it. Sort of with this idea that I would like the team feel, even though we're all independent brokers doing our own business. So that sort of camaraderie and that sort of collaboration is what really jazzes me about this business. And so that's what we're growing, and it's really fun.
So cool. Well, I just have to say for your listeners and the audience, we met over at your brick and mortar Scout. Yeah. We know all of us, our offices, when people say, where's your office? They say it's on the streets, right? If I'm doing my job, it's out in the mix, but you have a beautiful office. It is so warm. It is exactly what I thought it would be, getting to know you and appreciating your work and your business. So shout out to Scout for sure. You know, that you just set me up. Thank you. For putting me in the hot seat. You know, when you talked about team and your passion for building, you know, in your tenure, but certainly Scout, like, what is that communication? What is that team? What does that support piece bring to us? And also, like you, I am a working real estate broker and 11 years tenure in the field. And there's this new thing that you might have heard of, Jennnifer, maybe just some rumblings called some new forms, and specifically Form 41 and the new revised agency law pamphlet, because it's always been around.
Yeah.
You and I and probably a lot of folks listening to your podcast right now, we've heard about it coming. We knew it was coming. Every brokerage and team, getting back to your point, had different and varying communication around front loading that it's coming and front loading the prep. But this is going to be a loaded question. I know we have tons to talk about and we have a lot more minutes, but tell me a little bit about you as a broker, your brokers, and Scout. How are you guys absorbing this new drop, you know, like they say in the album world? Like, I was just waiting, like, tick-tock, tick-tock, right. January 1.
Boom,
so tell me a little bit, you know, I know, again, that's a loaded question. We'll disseminate lots of bits of it, but just kind of off the cuff, what's going on for you with Form 41 and new agency law?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I don't know if the listeners out there went to Battle of the Barristers, but anybody who did this last year, we were reminded, I think, in really good fashion that there have been attorneys, and particularly one, and forgive me, I'm not going to remember his name, I should know it, that worked years before, at least for the last 3 to 4 years, sort of calling out, right? This is coming. And we want this to come because this is a protection for us. So sort of saw these lawsuits as they're taking shape in Missouri and said, hey, Northwest Multiple Listing Service, let's do this differently. And here's how we can avoid some of this mess. So when that news dropped and when we knew this was coming, Scout, and because I'm the owner of Scout, I wanted to say, bravo, people at Scout. We have been practicing buyer broker agreement, used to be called buyer's agency, for years. I mean, obviously Scout's only been around 2 years, but before that at my previous firm, and even before that, when I was assistant manager at Windermere. So it was something that I incorporated about 15 years ago in my business. And I'm so glad that I did, partly because I feel like it's really great for a buyer, right? Why I'm doing it, but also because now that this is dropped, this is business as usual for me, right? Like, oh yeah, I already do this. Yay, this isn't hard. But I think it's going to be hard for a bunch of brokers who have sort of run this thing of saying, you know, we don't ask anyone to sign anything. We just want to help you buy a house. And now are being forced to have maybe a difficult conversation with buyers that's pretty unpracticed as a result of that. So it's sort of fun to role play and talk about it. And how are we going to talk to buyers about this in our own firm? But I think this is causing some disruption in our industry as buyer brokers are sort of saying, uh-oh, now what?
There's sort of this thing I have to get either comfortable with if I'm newer in the industry, to your point, or
Yeah.
newer talent, new to the market, or perhaps like us speaking, a bit more tenured. But it's like, okay, let me just make sure I'm clear and I'm direct and I've got it down. Jennnifer,
Yeah.
thank you so much for underscoring that for you, and not being trite about it at all. But it's sort of like, I've kind of been talking about this. Like, this isn't going to
Yeah.
be my first time having this conversation. But to your point, I'm going to just give a quick honor actually out to the Northwest MLS. I have the great fortune to chair on a national board called the Alliance. And just yesterday, the Alliance and I were talking to the Northwest MLS. And the reason I'm bringing this up for this topic is Washington led the charge. We were all on this call with that organization saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. What an honor, what a privilege that we live in an area where we're actually where we were getting ahead of it. But that being said, so let me ask you this. What are some, I don't want to say scripts, because scripts I think can sometimes feel inauthentic, but we say scripts and that's something we're comfortable with, right? Like when I use that term, I think, let me get it down. Let me have it like I'm breathing, blinking, sitting here talking to you in comfort and in trust.
Yeah.
So there's a term like cost of doing business in something. I think as an industry, we've gotten a little bit tripped up on the word commission, if I could kind of engage with you even in some wordsmithing. And, I think commission is great. It says something, but it also trips us up. So what would you say to maybe an experienced broker that just kind of never really talked about the cost of doing business in real estate, but maybe like a couple of your words or your script ideas that really allow you to just be comfortable when you're going on that buyer presentation interview? I think that would be so interesting to hear.
Thank you. I'm going to start by saying, no matter what brokerage you're with, you're always invited to come at 10 o'clock on Wednesdays down to the Scout office on California and practice with us. So I can't say that enough, that's so important to role play this. To your point, Kristine, about, in the comfort and safety of, I'm going to mess this up this time so that I can do it better with clients. And that isn't to say we're trying to sell them something. It's to say when I'm able to work out my own insecurities around what I'm talking about and be more confident in what I'm offering to the buyer, they're going to fall in line in a good way, right? It's sort of like we tell them how to behave by saying, this is what we expect. So if you want to come down and practice with us, we are a cross-pollination. Don't care where you're from. Come be with us and try it. Or I really want you to go to your managing broker and say, we need some classes on this. We need some practice for this. So that's first.
Right. Love it. Yeah.
And then secondly, I'll say, if you haven't done a buyer consult before, this is so important for your buyer to know how you're working for them. So some of the misnomer around this is the seller pays the commission. So you get me for free and that's great. In a way, that's true, right? We've sort of learned that our whole life. But as you and I were even talking about this interview, the reality is nobody's getting paid anything without the buyer's money. So sort of first and foremost, buyer, you're compensating me regardless of how we frame it, right? The seller's going to decide on a selling office commission. But at the end of the day, there is no commission or compensation to talk about if the buyer hasn't given an offer on the property, right? So at the end of the day, buyer, you're paying me, right? And now the seller has earmarked this much of it for the compensation for me. And maybe that's in line with the fee I charge. And maybe it's not. And so then where do we go? Right.
Right.
But I think that's important to sort of switch that up in our brain around buyers are always paying compensation. Right.
Right. I loved when you framed that the other day as we were sitting down at Scout, and I thought, gosh, perfect visual. I have to think I'm not the only slightly visual person that got into real estate, right? Because we're problem solvers, we're thinkers. We tend to be, in one regard or another, creative. We love on people. And I was like, that is a great visual. Thank you, Jennnifer Nelson. That was awesome.
Good.
And to kind of just spin on that, you said something that I want to go back to that I think is paramount in any relationship, let alone a business relationship where you're dealing with someone's most prized usually most expensive commodity, but we teach people how to treat us. And you led with that. I'm not sure if you even remember saying, but it's like, we kind of, that's something so important to remember in this new Form 41 new agency law refresh, is getting ready to receive the call, set the appointment, and have the interview, and kind of guide and show and teach, right? Guide and show and teach how this is going to be set up. Now, that being said, do you ever think when you're going into these conversations about your life as a consumer? Like, I think sometimes when we have these changes, myself included, I'm putting myself in the narrative, get a little bit of belly nerves, go, okay, I've been talking about this now for 11 years, but it's kind of now sort of a real thing, a force thing. It's a law thing. Do you ever think, gosh, when I'm Jennnifer out in the world spending my hard-earned money, how do other professionals talk about the services that they're about to deliver to me? Tell me a little bit about that. Like, how does that play into your psyche, your mind, or your business, Jennnifer? Like,
Absolutely.
just getting your head in that consumer lane.
This is years ago now, and it's one of my favorite examples and sort of stories that I talk to my brokers about. But at the time, my partner and she and I were looking for a financial advisor. And we were referred about 4 people, just like in a real estate world. And so we went to interview all of them. And the first 2 were no's right away, just whatever, weren't connecting with them, and the other, but there was 2. So the first one we went to after we got rid of the first 2 said, this is what I do. And, we said, well, how much does it cost? And she said, well, that's negotiable. It kind of depends on what's happening here. And just sort of was a little bit laissez-faire about that, but just like, we'll make it work. Don't worry, you won't have to do this, but we'll figure it out. But, that's great. So we left her and we literally went to the next interview to this woman's office. By the way, the first one met us at Starbucks, just saying, not kidding. This is how perfect this illustration is. And the next woman said, you need to come to my office in Bellevue. And we were like, oh, really? We have to drive to Bellevue? And she's like, yeah, this is the only place I have that meeting. So sort of get over yourself. So we get to Bellevue, right? And we go up to her office and we sit down, and she's behind her desk and we're asking questions, and she runs the conversation. She asks the questions. She's in charge of the meeting. It's super clear who the professional is, that she knows what she's doing. She's, even if she was brand new, she ran that meeting. And then at the end of it, we said, let's talk about fees. And she said, oh, sure. She said, now I sent you that email a little while ago about my fee, but let's go over it again. And she went over the fee. And I said, well, I'm wondering if any of that's negotiable. And she smiled and she just said, no, it's not. And I remember being like a little put off by it, right? Like, kind of like, well, okay, really? There's nobody that sliding scale or nothing. And, and she was like, no, this is my fee. And then she went on to say, and here's the benefits to what I do for you. And she said, I'm not for everybody. I mean, completely. There's other people that are going to, offer you different services for different levels, but you take your time. And I remember getting in the car with my partner and I was like, could you believe that? And my partner at the time said, I love her. Right. And it was this immediate attraction to confidence, to clarity of what she was providing, and to not backing down on her fee. And we ended up hiring her. We could have gotten it, quote unquote, cheaper with the person before who was sort of, about their fee. But we felt more taken care of with the person who was clear about what they were offering and how much they were charging for it. And I don't find that to be any different in our industry.
Boy, thank you for that. Is the number one best demonstration and illustration of how we can front load and take the reins of the conversation, because then it becomes less scary. And you just made me think of something recently. A client shared with me, Kristine, clear is my favorite color. And I just, I sort of looked up at her with fawny eyes. I was like, that's the best compliment I think I've gotten in my entire life. And you just said it so beautifully, Jennnifer, is in any situation, clear is always going to set expectations up and always be a better outcome, but specific to something newer. Even you and I right now talking on your podcast, we're saying we've been having the cost of doing business in real estate combos. And even at that, I shared with you in Scout very transparently, colleague to colleague. I said, I'm practicing this thing. I'm scripting this out with my team.
Yeah.
I'm, get in front of my iPhone and do a little banter before I go to that next interview. So,
Yeah.
not to be cavalier at all, although we've been doing it, it's still kind of, because here's the other thing. Would you agree? And I want to hear your point of view on this. There's a lot of chatter in our industry in general. Word on the street, word on the news, word on the 5 o'clock news, word on what's happening, over the water cooler. So I really think you nailed it. Like, it's just scripting, getting comfortable and getting ahead of it. But the other thing I want to ask you about is value. You just clearly set up with the listeners this value proposition about the woman you interviewed that you actually, you and your partner chose to go to.
Yep.
So what in your point of view for the audience are, whether you've been in real estate 6 months or 30 years, what are some of those value propositions that we can all just continue to get better at?
Yeah, that's such a good question.
What is your point of view on that?
Scott Monroe, who's one of my mentors and all-time favorite dudes in real estate, he's been doing it forever. And I hope he's listening. I'll make sure he listens to this later. But he said he went to this seminar or something over in Asia at one point, and he was a speaker. And he asked this room full of salespeople in here, who's the best at what they do? And no one raised their hand. And at the end of his talk, he said, I want you, no matter if you're day 2 in what you're doing or you're 20 years in, when someone asks you if you're the best at what you do, you raise your hand every time. And so I want to speak, first of all, just to the person who says, gosh, I'm not 22 years in, Jennnifer. That's really nice that you can walk in confidently because, of course, you have these years of experience behind you. But let's talk to the brand new agent or 5 years in, whatever, somewhere in that range, to say you have it already. So you're coming to this industry from wherever you came from. You're coming hopefully with a good support group, whether you're on a team, like a technical team, you're in a great brokerage, you've got great support of your managing broker. You're coming with your experience from the past of customer service, your zeal and your interest in providing legendary service. That in and of itself is going to make you the best broker for that client. So are we lining up 10 brokers and sort of saying, who's the best of these 10? No, that client wants you to say, I'm the best for you. And I'm going to work my ass off to prove that to you, right? So they're looking for your ability to say, I'm going to work so hard for you, but also I know that what I provide is of amazing value to you, whether you're 2 days in or 20 years in, right? I remember Kelly Satterfield, who's a broker at Scout. She started at my former firm, and I went to her first buyer broker consultation. And, we'd practiced in the office, and then she's got her first buyers, right? So she is green, brand new. And she said, would you just come to the meeting with me? And I said, of course. So I'm literally introduced as her, boss, whatever that means in real estate. And, just said, hey, I'm just here for fun and support. And I watched Kelly nail it.
Wow.
And this is her first time.
Owned that interview.
Owned it. She'd practiced. She knew the questions to ask. She asked follow-up questions. She talked about her value, what she's going to bring to the table, what she's going to do for them as buyers, that she's working when they're at work, just all of these things that we'd practiced. And at the end of it, the woman literally said, have you been in the business about 10 years? No kidding. This was like not scripted. And we looked at each other and laughed. Right. We looked at each other and laughed. And I said, this is her first buyer broker interview. You will be her first client. And, they were like, wow, we didn't see that one coming. And it didn't change anything for them. They were just like, wow, we believe that Kelly's going to work hard for us. We believe we're going to get that value. So to the newer broker out there, I would say you have to first believe it. This is a mindset issue. Mm-hmm. And then surround yourselves with people that are going to compliment, support you, practice it so that when you walk in that room, you really do say, I offer better than anyone else for you. And here's how, right?
Right. Jennnifer, that is a perfect illustration. And you also said a couple other things that I'm tapping into for the audience and even myself is it's a standard. We said earlier when we jumped into this segment, what are some trigger words? What are some isms? What are some ways that we can all help each other get more comfortable? And the thing I kept hearing you say in many versions is a standard, because that financial advisor that you and your partner interviewed, her first standard was, you got to come to my Bellevue office.
Yep.
Like that wasn't great. There weren't 5 other location options. that
Yeah.
is a standard. And I think the
Yeah.
more that we can use those words, it doesn't feel so scary. It's like, oh, well, I think that's probably a pretty good thing, is to have some standards. That
Yeah.
being said, you also touched on a couple things I'd like to go a little deeper on. Preparation, preparation, preparation. So I'll put myself in the consumer hat. When I go to get my hair cut and I look at the price that went up, and how do I know it went up? Because there's a laminated sign with red flashing lights on the counter that I'm
Uh-huh.
looking at where my coffee and my iPhone is, because there's standards and clarity. Now, where I'm going with this, real story, is how can we as brokers, Jennnifer, just like that hairdresser took a step, a tactical, administrative execution, whatever word you want to call, and actually communicated it. There's a sign right in front of my face. So what are some ways of, I think you shared in an email, you shared the story about your financial advisor, the phone call. Like, what are some of these sort of prep, like literally logistical steps as brokers that we can kind of, I call it warm up, like noodle with the client a little bit before we actually go in for the cost of doing business in real estate convo? Like, what are some of those things to you in Scout? Like those tactical steps?
I was talking with a broker that does an amazing book of business. Okay. And I'm going to leave his name out of it because there's no shame here in whatsoever. But what I was not impressed with, even though he does a lot of business, was that he's sort of laissez-faire about all of these kinds of things. And he's
Mm.
a little bit of a hamster on a wheel in that he'll take whatever compensation is offered. He'll work with whomever. He's sort of just a get along guy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I challenged him on that a little bit, he said, yeah, I really should have better business practices, his words. So let's go back to those business practices. One of them, as we've already mentioned, is that your office should be the place where consumers come to you to sit down. Please don't do a Starbucks. Please, if you can avoid it, don't go to their house. That's where they live. Their kids are crazy. They're doing the dishes. That's not a sign that they're interested in doing business with you. And it doesn't set you up as the professional. So
Love
they're
it.
not going to be fully engaged until they actually get in their car, make a commitment to make that drive to wherever your office is, sit down.
You just said remove the barriers. I'm
Remove
just,
the
okay.
barriers,
Number
right?
one, remove the
Okay.
barriers.
Remove the
I
barriers.
love it. I'm taking notes.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. Pocket Hours is brought to you by Scout Real Estate. Hi, I'm Jennnifer Nelson, owner at Scout Real Estate. I started this firm with the vision of doing things differently, with our focus on legendary service for our clients and creating a community of producing agents to spur each other to do higher quality work. If you are interested in learning more about how a small group of like-minded brokers have come together to have some fun while doing a lot of business, reach out to me, 206-227-7966, or email Jennnifer@scoutrealestate.com. I promise you this, fun is a high priority for me, but so is winning. So if you appreciate those two things, you might be interested in Scout. Looking forward to hearing from you. Number two is when those brokers come in, we have some psychological things that we do every single time. And these are business practices I'd love for anyone to do. We have a board as you walk into the office. When you're having a consultation, their names are written on that board. And it has been so interesting, Kristine, to watch as people that as stoic as they can be, right? You've got the analyst from Amazon, and I'm going to stereotype that he's a man this time, but it could be a woman. It doesn't matter. And he's super stoic, and he walks in and he goes, hey, that's my name, right? And it's just this immediate understanding that you're expecting them, that you know their name. You have a file folder with their name on it as you sit down. You have water ready. These kinds of things that set you up. You have your list of buyer broker consultation questions, which 22 years in, Kristine, I don't go off book. Like I'm looking at these questions, right? Every time. Because, and I even say it out loud. I said, hey, I ask every buyer the same question, just so you know, I'm going to be reading these so I don't forget anything. I want to give you the most comprehensive experience you can get. Okay. So these are the kinds of things that set you up to where they go and interview another buyer at a Starbucks buyer broker. And they're like, sure, what kind of house do you want? Da, 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 da. Let's go see this one right now. There's no formality or professionalism, in my opinion, when you don't say you're about to spend on average in Seattle $1 million to buy a house and we're going to meet at Starbucks. Those don't go together for me. Right.
Right.
So
I
those are some
love
couple
that.
things.
Those are real life boots on the streets, tactical things. And here's what that triggered in me to ask back to you, just to sort of shadow this. When we are setting up, we take the phone call, we have the outline, we have the name on the board, we have the packet, laptop, iPad, whatever this is, the presentation, the preparation. Then when we get to talking about money, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's like light years away if you sit down with someone for 45 minutes, an hour, 90 minutes. Then when we get to talking about the money, then you're saying we have worked darn hard and clear to set up that value proposition.
For sure.
I'm worth the 3% because I just showed and evaluated with you why, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's so great. Now, that being said, let's talk about some objections. Let's just, you and I talked about this, but we're not scripted. We are just two professionals talking about real estate. Yep. So what is a way that you might handle, or some hot tips and tricks if somebody just says, you know what, that I'm interviewing a couple buyer brokers, Jennnifer, you've been great. You've done everything you said you were going to do. Your reputation is spot on with how you've treated me today here at Scout. I don't have the 3%. I'm paying from Paul to whatever the saying is, selling all of my clothes on eBay, to come up with, to your point, to be able to afford a home in one of the most expensive cities in the nation, underscore. Hey, Jennnifer, again, role playing. Hey, Jennnifer, I want to hire you. Like, you're it. You're the one. But I'm just really struggling how to come up with that 3%. That you well deserve. I just don't have it. What do we say, Jennnifer? What are our tools in our bag to help them? They don't know what they don't know. What do we say to help them figure out where to get that money? What are some ways that you will tackle that or have tackled that?
That's a great question. Yeah. And just for disclaimer portions of this, so that we're in line with all of our laws, there's no standard of compensation. So we're talking numbers, but that doesn't mean that there's a standard or an expectation. We are going to be speaking about a couple different percentages as we keep going forward. But again, there is no standard compensation.
Examples only.
Yeah. And I do want to role play this with you. But before I do, I want to make really big mention of this for our listeners. And that's to say this. I know you've seen it, but so follow with me here. There's a house on the market for $900,000. And these buyers have said, we want to buy this house. We have 20% down, 10% down, whatever. They're a little bit like, we don't know if we want to pay you your percentage, your fee. What ends up happening, and you watch this happen, is that they will escalate from 900,000 to 1.1. They will somehow come up with 200,000 more dollars to get that house. But they are back over here saying, your $4,000, we just can't find it. And so I want to say that out loud because I really think that's perspective. And in our environment of buying and in our market for years now, I have watched buyers absolutely negotiate, even if it's not in a multiple offer. If I'm on the listing side, they're going to give the buyer 20 grand in a blink of an eye, but they're over here with me struggling to pay me this because I've let them in on the fact that that might be negotiable. So if we back up for just a minute, give you a little perspective. Let's say to the person who says to me, we'd really love to work for you, but honestly, someone else that we also like is, able to do this for less, right? And I would say, wow, that's amazing. The only thing I might ask you then, buyer, is to say, do you think there's a difference in the level of service that's going to be provided? And I'm going to tell you a quick story. I know, Kristine, we talked about this beforehand, but this was my second time recently at Canlis. And I don't know if you've ever been to Canlis restaurant. If you haven't,
mind blowing.
Save your pennies and go, right? And I was thinking this, right. This is so appropriate for our conversation because in Seattle, if you're a foodie at all, you sort of know that there's a pretty decent amount, like at least a good handful or two of really good restaurants, right? They serve really good food. And I would frequent them, and I do. So Canlis is also, I believe, to be really good food, but they charge, I don't know, probably double the experience, right? It's double what I can go over here.
Very
safe to say, right? Safe to say. So you go to a nice dinner at Canlis for two people, and you're $400.
Yeah, some good wine, all the things. Yeah.
So on a level of just saying, hey, if we're comparing good food and good food, right? There's one that is definitely less expensive and you're still getting good food, hands down. However, You cannot explain Canlis to anyone who hasn't gone to Canlis. So from the minute you show up at Canlis, there's valet parking for everybody, no matter what. They take your key. They don't give you a little chart that says, here's your thing that you turn in when you get your key back. No, they're going to remember this is your car without having to work hard, right? They're taking your coat. Same thing. There's no coat check. And you get a number that you lose the piece of paper and you can't remember where your coat thing. No, they remember that's your coat. You go sit down, and someone told me that all the people are trained in ballet or something. I don't know if that's even true, but the way they move around the floor, right? The way they pass
it's so elegant, all of it.
So elegant. So you eat this great meal. If you stand up to go to the restroom, someone's accompanying you, your napkins pulled back over. At my experience recently was they were like, hey, you're having fish, but you ordered red wine. Gosh, we really think you should have some white wine. How about we give you a half a glass of white wine just for those bites of that fish, right? They thought of it.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you going to say? No, you're like, of course.
Never,
this is good.
Me.
Yeah, this is good. And then at the end, you're walking out after you've paid, and they're heating up your coat by the fire. They're putting on your coat on your body, and your car is parked outside. So I didn't drive away from Canlis saying, well, damn it, that was just too expensive.
That wasn't fun at all.
Yeah, right. I drove away feeling like I was a billionaire. I drove away feeling so served, so seen, so taken care of, that the money made sense to me. So I'm going to it's probably pretty obvious, but I'm going to say, if you're believing in your legendary service and that you're going to provide that Canlis level, then the money will follow. Like there isn't someone that's going to go, oh, damn it. I wish we wouldn't have paid Jennnifer or Kristine 3% for that deal because we just didn't feel very served.
You know, that illustration and everything you just shared with the listeners, to me, just listening to every word, it's reframing these new conversations that are being mandated January 1, 2024. And it, to me, just puts the glass half full. And here's why. There's two takeaways that I got, and I'm sure the listeners have a list full. There's really two parts. It's emotion experience, like you just beautifully taught. You took us on a visual, emotional journey with your experience at Canlis. That's that. The other is all the tactical stuff that can't be changed, meaning in our world, the Form 41, if you want to ensure you're getting paid as a buyer broker when you spend 50, 60 hours, 3 months, 2 weeks with a buyer, or it is the law to have the new agency law, January 1, 2024 pamphlet signed. Why I just took that visual, going back to being a creative visual person, is this almost creates the safety net. To the listeners, it's right there in print. Own it, learn it, love it, talk about it like it's your eyelids, because the experience, the front loading of the service, everything we're talking about, the standard, that the things that Canlis did for you is their brand standard. That's never going to change. And I just had this moment. I was like, that just makes me feel calmer. It's like the meaning, like the form stuff is the math stuff. Like, like I don't mean get over it in a snarky way, like learn it, like own it. Like, you got to, there is no option party. But all that other stuff, Jennnifer, that you just shared about you and your service in Scout and how you had that takeaway from Canlis, that's the glass half full. Look at the driver's seat we're all in. What a tremendous gift as entrepreneurs and as real estate brokers to yield that much, like to your point, like we're teaching people how to treat us because we're treating them exceptional.
Ooh,
wow, that was so cool. I mean, because here's the thing. I'm no exception. Anybody listening, my colleagues at work, there's been some fear.
Yeah, absolutely.
6 months ago, and honor to your brokerage, the brokerage that I partner with, got ahead of it. I can assure you, there was those Annie Fitzsimmons, Washington Realtor, Seattle King County Realtor podcasts and webinars and classes. So I've had to work through some angst and some anxiety, because then all of a sudden I'm like, I've kind of always been doing this. Do I have to do something different? Was I doing it wrong? So I think it's so important that we're talking about it. And
I do too.
And being kind to each other, being inclusive. Like, I got you. I have a little belly burn, each time too, but each week it gets a little easier.
For sure.
And a little clearer.
And I will say this too, just to be clear too, for the listeners, it wasn't a week ago that I had a guy that was referred to me reach out. We had our buyer broker consultation. He said these exact same things. I went through my exact process. At the end of it, he said, Jennnifer, I think you're fantastic. I would hire you. However, I interviewed this other guy and he's willing to do it for a 0.5% less. And I'm going to go with him. So first of all, just be clear. This happens to me too. And I expect it's going to continue to happen to me. I just want to say out loud, trust the process, trust the fact that you're always going to lose some. And in fact, if you're not, I'm more worried. I'm more worried
Right.
that you're not defined.
Right.
You got to get
Yeah.
defined. And it's okay. It's okay. And what I said back to him is, hey, best of luck out there. It's a very competitive, difficult market. If you're not receiving the level of service that you thought you were going to get, I'm here. Best of luck. And I just leave
Yeah.
it there because every now and then those people come back around and say, oh, wait, we actually do want what you're providing, right?
Right. Right.
The second thing
Very
is to
cool.
say there's a reasonable compensation. And in conversation with a buddy of mine who also does this business, he said, we have done research to say 98% of the listings in Seattle proper, okay, are 2.5 or above. 98%. So that's to say this, if you can say to your buyers, I would like a reasonable compensation. And here's how we know what reasonable is. Almost 100%, right,
Yes.
of the listings are
Yes.
offering the buyer broker this amount of money. And if we get past that $2 million mark for me or whatever it is for you, it starts to get unreasonable to me that I'm asking the same fee. So there is a part where that breaks down for me where I say, gosh, you're buying a $2 million house. That 3% doesn't make sense anymore. Here's my fee now, right? Because that starts to be an inordinate amount of money for the level of service that I'm providing, right? But for the most part, if our median price is around $1 million here, what's your fee going to be? And I'm not telling you, you got to be 3% or you got to be 2.5, or you decide for your business, but then stay true to that. Just stay true, right?
Boy, you couldn't have said it better. And that is that advantage, be it whether you have a managing broker that has a certain set of standards in an office or a brokerage brand. But generally speaking, within all the confines of whatever that is or isn't, what you just said to me and the listeners is we have the ability to have those conversations. We can still lead those. We are entrepreneurs. We are independent contractors. We get to lead and guide those decisions. And that's what a gift too, right? I mean, what a wonderful thing to be in a career where you can sit down and go, let's intelligently figure this out. Like, you have a
For
need.
sure.
I have the solution for your need. Let's figure out how we can all get to the home run here.
Yeah,
I love
for
that.
sure.
Here's the other thing on the buyer broker side, going back just for a second, if I may, around actual money, is don't you also believe, Jennnifer, as buyer brokers, and for some of us like you and I on this podcast, we also are listing, selling brokers,
Yeah.
that there's a lot of ways to also coach and guide the buyer on how that might be finessed on what I would call game day. Like,
Yeah.
even though the listing says, I'm role playing here with you, even though Jennnifer, my buyer, the listing says they are not offering buyer broker compensation, we're about to send over this smoking hot offer.
Yeah.
And guess what?
Yeah.
That seller has a house to sell. And there
Yeah.
just might be a chance that we can do this thing called re-ask,
Yeah.
push,
Exactly.
right? Don't
Yep.
you think when the rubber hits the
Absolutely.
road, not
Yep.
only in that regard, re-ask, people change their mind, by the way, when they're in a business transaction, they're negotiating. The other thing is you could absorb it into your offer price, right? There's some tactical, I'm not a lender. I'm smart enough to stay in my lane, but as a high volume broker that serves both sides of the coin, having buyers and sellers, don't you think, and I'd love to hear your opinion on that, that when it comes to, the game day, the offer, the rubber hitting the road, that there are these really creative ways that we can also guide and coach our buyers?
The reason that Kristine was asked to be the moderator on this is because two people came up to me and said, whoever you're going to get to interview you, please choose that wordsmith lady that you had on the show. And that is
You're
true. And
kind.
it's proving to be true right now.
You're kind. Thank
Listening
you.
to you
It's such an honor. Thank you.
talk. Here's what I'll say. I want to go back to a couple of scenarios. I can count on one hand, but it still happened at least 4 or 5 times when a seller is offering. I mean, again, these are arbitrary numbers for everybody listening.
Right. We're
They're
role
offering
playing.
2.5. We're role playing. The seller's offering 2.5. My buyer comes to the table. Here's our offer. Even before this change happened, let's go back 3 years ago. I would throw in a 41C. and just say, oh, nope, my fee's 3%, and submit the offer as is. Like, oh, thank you. Here's my buyer. They want to buy it. Oh, but that's too short for what fee I, get paid. And they go through. There isn't any conversation even. I mean, at least 3 of those 5 times, the seller just signs it, right? Oh, okay. Well, you're bringing me a buyer and that's the fee you're going to charge. Then, okay, we're going to pay it. So don't be worried. I think as worried as we get to even just ask for what you want and deserve. Okay. Secondly, boy, working this into the loan, right? Spread that out over 30 years. On average, people are in home, as we know, 5 to 7 years. They're never going to pay 30 years of interest on that difference between whatever percentage you're asking and what the seller's offering. So it oftentimes can be rolled into the loan. I guess what I found is more times than not, there's an easy solution that doesn't have the buyer writing a check at the escrow table for the difference. In fact, I think maybe one time in 22 years, I've had that happen, right?
Pretty good
The rest
perspective.
the rest of the 15 years I've been practicing this, we figure it out in the loan. And so some people are worried that the buyer's going to, and I'm going to put air quotes for those of you who can't see this, have to come out of pocket for that extra money. And just keep in mind, they're coming out of pocket for the entire loan, right? They're borrowing $1 million. And adding the difference of your commission isn't going to change their life, but it's going to keep your standard in play.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, just to kind of round this out, and even though I'm moderating to put you in the hot seat on your podcast, I do want to be respectful of time. I figure you're going to trigger me. Do we have time for one more
question,
hot topic? Okay, great. So that all of this kind of coming together, for one, just me sitting with you, listening, great ideas, lots to noodle on, food for thought, some scripting ideas, realizing we're all in this together, right? It's like if you're practicing real estate out here and January 1 rolled around for you like it did for Jennnifer and I, then we're really all in the same boat. But that being said, when we think about going to Canlis, taking a flight where we thought the service was great, getting a haircut, getting our teeth cleaned, going to get our car serviced, insert the consumer experience is, I do believe, Jennnifer, and I'd love your final thoughts on this. The more that we can say things to that buyer in front of us interviewing us, you're going to get the email follow-ups from me. You're going to get the phone calls. You're going to get the Northwest MLS search portals of me checking it 20 million times a day. Those are my silly words. The more that we're letting that buyer know in actual real tactical stuff, I'm going to be doing A, I'm going to be doing B, I'm going to be doing C, because they don't know what they don't know. And all of a sudden, whatever the number, role playing 2%, 2.53, they don't know all the work that I'm about, that you're about, that your colleagues and your team at Scout are about to pour into them. What would be your final thoughts on how to become a really good communicator of all of that value that's going to happen, so that they hear that percentage and they go, yeah, duh. Like, hello, that is so worth it. Like, what are your final thoughts on that, Jennnifer?
That's great. 2 things come to mind. One is, at the end of the day, and I say this to buyers, I want you to want to refer me, because that's my business model, right? I am a relationship building business. I am not transactional. So the difference between those 2 things is vast in what your experience as a buyer. Potentially, if you'd hired a discount broker, you might find that they have to be on top of transactional volume, and I'm snapping, right? In order to make the money they want to make, where I'm more concerned about your experience, less concerned about the house you buy. I want you to buy a good house. But at the end of the day, I want you to feel so happy about your experience that you can't not talk about it. Again, my experience at Canlis, I probably talked about that for 2 days. People around me were like, all right, I might want to go, because I was so impressed with what happened, right? Secondly, while I don't love fear tactics, and I don't present it this way, we get on a boat or on an airplane, and as long as those are smooth sailing, skies or seas, right? We could have used the discount broker. But the minute there's a big wave or choppy skies, we are so glad that we hired someone who knows how to navigate those. And we don't know till we hit them. We wouldn't
Right.
know that. So you're
Right.
walking into this scenario of buying a house, hoping it goes perfectly. And we all are. And my job is to ensure that it does. But what you're paying for is someone who knows how to navigate those choppy moments and get you to the finish line, not
Mm,
someone who's trying to hurry up and get to their commission because they have to get on to their next one to keep getting paid. And that difference is huge, right?
mm.
So using those examples, again, not as a fear tactic, but more like,
Real life
I've been doing
stuff.
this real life stuff, right?
Real life
I
stuff.
care about the details. I care about you getting to that finish line, even if it's super bumpy, knowing that
Mhm.
I've got the process under control. So,
That is really a great end to this, because what that says right there is you're already front loading everything that your intention is, which is to really, I'm just going to say, be their broker for life, right? I mean, you said all of it so well, and what it's saying to that person in front of you, the person that's interviewing you for the buyer broker in this particular podcast conversation, is you want to be their broker for life, Jennnifer,
yeah,
and you're
yeah,
about to show, share, and engage with them in a way that is elevated. It's worth every penny. It sets you apart as a broker, and they're about to like see it in play, see you execute
yeah,
it. So thank you for kind of pulling us full circle on how we could, because earlier we used the word disruptor. We've used it when we
yeah,
talked at Scout. We used it on here. Is a disruption is an opportunity for us to become a topic expert again.
yeah. It's true.
Right? Isn't that
It's true.
cool? A
Yeah,
topic expert again and again and again. So,
yeah.
on your final thoughts with that new Form 41, the revised agency law, January 1, 2024, it's here. It came. We're in it. We're living
Yeah,
it. So,
yeah.
what are your final thoughts before we sign off on this episode of your podcast?
First of all, thank you so much. This has been a really fun
Oh, you're
conversation. I
welcome.
really, really appreciate it. And I loved so many things that you said, Kristine, in moderating this. But one of the things that stands out, and I'd love to end with this, is that what ends up happening is for people that succeed, they see the disruption as an opportunity to get even more clear about their value proposition and what they provide. So
Mhm.
thank God for what happened in Missouri. I mean, no offense, nobody wants to get sued.
Yeah.
But what it brings to the forefront is, what are we doing? How are we
Mhm.
being clear and transparent with our buyers? And then
Mhm.
what is the fee for the services that we provide? What a
Mhm.
great disruptor to help us get clear on that. And so take it as that.
Mhm.
Go
Yeah.
run with it. Get really good at this, and you're going to have more buyers than you know what to do with. So,
Absolutely. And I just wanted to say thank you so much, Jennnifer, for the honor and privilege of being asked to be the moderator. I had a blast. It was so fun. I learn 8 million things every time I talk to you. So I have my own notes, even though I was, wanting to make sure we kept the conversation going. So thank you again for including me.
you're welcome. Appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for listening into Pocket Hours. I hope this has been interesting, fun, made you laugh, made you think, spurred you on to do and implement some new things in your business. I appreciate your time and hope this has been a good use of it, period. Now, go be the agent you would hire.